Hi, this is Shauna, the CEO and founder of Fuel Talent. One of the things I have loved most in my 25-year recruiting career has always been the stories that people tell. Stories of leadership, career choices, company ideas, and team building. My inspiration for starting the What Fuels You podcast came from being curious about people's lives and wanting to help share their stories. What path brought them to this place? What decisions did they make that led to failures and successes? Who influenced those decisions, and what lessons were learned along the way? I hope you enjoy the What Fuels You podcast. On today's episode of the What Fuels You podcast, I'm sitting down with Liz Dunn. Liz started her career as a software engineer at Microsoft, but left after realizing she's more of a scrappy, small company type of person. Always wanting to do something with cities and buildings, Liz started Dunn Hobbes, a real estate development company in 1998. Over the last 20 years, she has created several developments, particularly in Capitol Hill, while maintaining the character and uniqueness of the buildings and neighborhoods. Among these are Melrose Market, Chop House Row, the Cloud Room, and Cloud Studios, where we are currently recording. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Shauna.
Welcome. You're the best. Okay, we're going to start with rapid fire. Are you ready?
As ready as I'll ever be.
Best gift you've ever received?
Oh, my grandpa gave us a puppy when I was in high school. He showed up with this cardboard box in the middle of winter.
Oh,
my
that's
mom
a
could
good
have killed
grandpa.
him.
Yeah, and you're like, thanks, but no thanks.
She was thanks, but no thanks. But like it was too late.
What did you name the puppy?
Patrick.
Oh, cute. It's like
Yeah.
a man dog.
Man dog.
A man dog. Skiing or snowboarding?
Skiing, for sure.
But you used to be snowboarder.
Only for one season. I got to the point where I could turn both ways and said, okay, I got this, but I don't like it. I'm going to go back to skiing.
For those listening, Liz and I met up in Whistler, and she's a baller skier. I'm very into that. I'm jealous. Are you a morning or a night person?
I am totally a night person.
Me too.
You know, there was this article in the New York Times recently that explained that night people will never be retrained and no one should try to retrain us.
Yeah.
And that, you know, we are also just awesome in our own way.
I love it. What time do you go to bed?
I usually go to bed by midnight, so it's not crazy. When I was younger, like when I was in my 20s working at Microsoft, I did all my best work at 4 a.m. It was insane.
So were you calling that night or morning?
Well, and then it was still the day before for me, usually. And then I'd go to bed and then I'd get up, sometime midday.
Nice. If you could teach any subject, what would it be?
I teach now and I love it. And I teach the value of small-scale real estate development, like why cities should want it.
Oh, interesting. Or at UW?
Yeah. I guest lecture at UW in the Foster School and in the Renstead School.
Very cool. And what about if you were teaching like elementary school?
Oh, probably math. I love the cleanness of math.
Yeah, it's very measurable.
It's very measurable. And kids who think that they don't get it, they totally do.
Best concert you've ever attended?
Okay, that is such a tough one. I'm going to go back to the first concert I ever attended because it's hilarious. Nazareth and Aerosmith at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. So that was pretty memorable. I was like 15 or 16 years old. And I've been to a lot of amazing concerts over the years. The Pearl Jam concerts last summer were pretty memorable, right? So how's that? That's the bookend. That's like the first concert I ever went to and probably the most recent big concert that I've been to.
Yeah, I know you love music, so that's why I wanted to ask you that. What word do people use most often to describe you?
God, I have no idea.
I know what word. I mean, you're just real. I don't know.
Oh, that's awesome.
I feel like everyone really feels that you're very humble and accessible and just cool. I don't know.
Well, Shauna, that's actually awesome to hear because I'd like to think that I do keep it real. You never know what people say about you, but if that's it, that is awesome.
Yeah,
and I feel like hopefully true.
Yeah. I'm going to just take you back to early days, to childhood. I know you're from Canada, and Canadians have a lot of pride in being from Canada. How do you feel that has shaped you?
I think Canadians grow up with this sense of empathy and generosity that is sort of built in culturally. And that's true whether you were born in Canada or whether you were an immigrant. There is one of the things that Canadians pride themselves on is that generosity of spirit that sort of absorbs everybody into this very not monolithic but multicultural society. Canada's a fairly young country, so maybe the reason that we're a little bit better at that than other places is there's not a lot of baggage. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
I have not met a Canadian that I don't like, I have to say.
Yeah.
They're all really likable.
They're pretty nice. Sometimes to a fault, but the cliche is true.
Yeah.
We're all pretty nice.
You're nice, but you're not the kind of person I would think would be taken advantage of or
but see, this is the good thing about having been in America for 30 years is,
you're like,
I've got a backbone, so,
And so tell me about your childhood. Is it something you look back fondly on?
Absolutely. I grew up on a farm. My parents were both teachers. There was not a ton of money, but there was a ton of, obviously, academic motivation on their part, for me to be an overachiever academically. So there was quite a bit of pressure there, but, that's completely understandable. I spent my entire childhood and especially my teenage years walking that line between getting good grades and getting in all kinds of trouble, some of which they knew about and some of which they didn't. So I was like the bad kid pretending to be the good kid. And
I was the good kid being the good kid.
Yeah. Oh, well, see, that would have been a lot easier on my parents. I only ran away from home once. I only got kicked out once. In the end, I made it all the way through. I've never seen two parents more relieved than the day I went off to college. And they were hilarious. They literally washed their hands of me that very day.
That's hilarious. My parents were laid back. They were very clear on their values, but they also were the types who were like, if you want to sneak out, no problem. Just let us know where you're going to be so we don't worry. And it just kind of lost its allure for me. I'm like, ugh. Well, and so I never did sneak out.
I think that's actually really good parenting. Yeah. Were you the oldest?
No, I was the youngest.
Yes.
My brother was a little more naughty.
So this is exactly the difference between your upbringing and mine. I was the oldest. And you know how parents of oldest kids are like, they're super sure you're going to screw it up. Yeah. And as parents, they're super sure they're going to screw it up. So they're really tense.
Yes.
And, with my younger brother, they just didn't even care anymore because they've been through
And
the
was he
ringer.
naughty?
No, and so he was like you. They were like, okay, sort of just do whatever you want and tell us where you are. Yeah. And, plus there's a little bit of sexism there, right? Yeah. Like he's a boy and I was a girl. And so he was a totally good kid because just like you, they'd taken all the edge out of it for him. And he was just a different personality than me.
So
just
funny.
a more laid back
Is he
kid.
in Canada?
He's in Canada. He's a veterinarian of large animals in southern Alberta.
The farm must have shaped him.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. We grew up in a really rural environment, and my dad commuted to the city to teach college.
Wow. I didn't realize that. And so was it one of those homes with no TV?
They weren't quite that strict, but there was a lot of organic gardening, and we were forced to eat a lot of wormy apples and weird vegetables that only hippie academic parents would grow, if you know what I mean.
That is so funny. Mm-hmm. And so tell me about University of Waterloo. That's where you went for undergrad.
Yeah.
Is that kind of an obvious choice for Canadians? Is it like the UW of...
It's like the MIT.
The MIT.
Of Canada.
So it's a really good school.
It's the super nerdy science and math school. Okay. Science, math, and engineering. It has other great faculties too, but it's really famous for science, math, and engineering. Mm-hmm. And again, going back to the fact that my parents really did not have a ton of money then. My dad didn't graduate from grad school till I was 9 or 10 years old. And so they were catching up on their own, student loans and mortgage payments and everything else. And so I paid my way through school. But the great thing about Waterloo, besides being the best science and math school in Canada, is they have a 5-year co-op program where you work half the time and go to school half the time.
Where did you work?
You literally can earn your way through. Well, this is how I ended up at Microsoft. So I did get a full ride scholarship based on my math abilities that paid my tuition. So that's great.
Were you always into math? Obviously, all the research that shows that women and girls in general don't consider themselves good. And so it's this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's absolutely a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's all conditioning. It drives me insane. I was so lucky to have 2 parents who were like, you are really good at math. And then a bunch of teachers who were like, oh my God, you're so awesome at math. So I never doubted myself.
Did you ever have any teachers doubt you?
Never.
And teachers that shaped you?
Teachers that shaped me. My high school math teacher, Mr. Doughton, I to that day, he's passed away, but I mean, God bless that man. He was so excited for me. He coached me. Canada has these national math contests, which is great because you kind of know where you stand nationally. Mm-hmm. I had these teachers that coached me for these contests. And so I kind of knew I was hot stuff in math, which is great. I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but it was really good to have that confidence from early on.
For sure. And so what about your interest in computer science?
My dad was really good about seeing, he was in a college environment that personal computers were kind of coming up on his radar when I was in, say, grade 10 or grade 11. And he brought home some kind of Apple. It was like maybe a Lisa, some early Apple. He was able to borrow it from the college for a month, and he brought it home and he gave it to me and he said, here, like, you can write little programs, you can do this, and just bang around on it. And at exactly the same time, my school got this crazy old mainframe computer that you could like fill out the pencil cards and feed them in. And so, these same great teachers who were coaching me in math were like, okay, we're going to take this group of students, we're going to teach them how to like code these little programs on the cards. So life is timing, right? Same time my dad brings home a computer from the college, my teachers are getting me to write these little programs at school. And my parents were super keen on me getting the math scholarship. That was obviously like monetarily a big deal, but my dad was also like, no, you can do computer science. You don't just have to be a high school math teacher. Like there are careers now for people in math. So I wanted to be an architect, by the way.
Yeah.
And I had come home from a high school job fair and I'm like, I want to be an architect because I'd always drawn buildings, as a hobby. And
that's not surprising.
And my parents were like, no way, because you're going to take the damn math scholarship, and then my dad was trying to convince me computer science. And they said, and then you can do whatever you want. But like right now under our roof, you're gonna do this. I'm always telling my little nieces, like, it's the contract between parent and teenager that, they're responsible for you up until that moment. And you can understand why they want to put you on one path and not another. And you kind of have to suck that up till you're 18 years old. And later in life, you get to make a different set of choices if that's what you want. But I am entirely grateful to my parents for setting me.
As you should be. I mean, you're unique, right? How many women were in your program?
Yeah, well, Waterloo, and I knew this before I went. We were less than 1 in 5. Like we were less than 20% of that.
So you started to say that's what brought you to Microsoft, but you also have all these other degrees. So where in that?
Well, so that was my undergrad, and that is what brought me to Microsoft. The co-op program was really well known in Canada. So these Canadian employers knew it was an awesome way to get really talented but cheap help on these 4-month work terms. And so I worked for IBM, and then I went to work for an investment bank, helping the investment bankers with some information system stuff, like writing them programs so that they could like research their companies and stuff. And then during that time, Microsoft had hired a couple full-time Waterloo people who said, oh my God, you're totally missing out on this co-op thing. And so they showed up, and I was the first co-op student. So they showed up to recruit at Waterloo for co-op students, and I was the first one, along with one other engineering student. So the two of us go off to Seattle. No one, from Waterloo's ever gone for a work term, a student.
Did you know anything about Seattle?
No, and in fact, I was confused about where it was. I had it confused with Denver. So Canadians accuse Americans of being bad at geography, but can I tell you, like, Canadians are just as bad at U.S. geography.
Right.
And I go home that weekend after I interview. It was a really fun, cool interview. And I'm like, hey, I interviewed with this really cool company, and it's in Seattle, and it's in the Rocky Mountains, and I'm going to learn to ski. And my dad's like, Seattle's not in the Rocky Mountains. Seattle's like 2 hours south of Vancouver. And he pulls the atlas off the bookshelf and opens it up and says it, shows it to me.
And how many people were at Microsoft at that time?
When I was my first work term, I was employee number 800 on my badge. That was in Redmond. There were people internationally, so the company must have been like maybe 1,200 or 1,500. I don't know, but there were 800 in Redmond. They had literally just moved when I landed. In January, they had just moved like a month or two before to the new Redmond campus, which they just demolished.
Yes.
It was super fun.
I mean, it's really a unique experience to be early Microsoft.
And it's super challenging.
Challenging.
Like I landed and I was like, okay, now I've met my match. Now I'm really going to get pushed.
I've had a few people on the podcast that have been early Microsoft. And actually, I think your name has come up. Jonathan Sposato.
Yeah.
Richard Tate.
Yeah. Richard and I, and Richard wasn't, neither of those guys were there when I was interning, but by the time I came back to work for them full time in 1988, Richard and I had our offices next door to each other.
I would have loved to be a fly on the wall.
And
you two were so fun.
Our night owl existence, stealing food from each other. And
so while you were at Microsoft, is that when you got your master's and MBA?
So after I'd been at Microsoft about 5 years. I was feeling kind of burnout. And I was feeling also like I'd been taken off this path that I had wanted to do an MBA kind of right after undergrad. In fact, Microsoft made me a full-time job offer and I turned it down. It's so funny. I said, no, I'm going to go do an MBA. I was super overly confident that I was going to get into the program that I wanted to get into, and I didn't. I got a 2-year deferral, and I had to go back to them and say,
just kidding.
Just kidding. Can I come work for you for 2 years full time? And they were like, of course you can. So that was great. And then stuff happens. Like you get onto projects that are really interesting. And so 5 years goes by in a flash. And then I start to get antsy.
What types of projects were you working on at Microsoft?
I worked all over the company. I started as a coder. And so I worked on one of the later versions of DOS and then the first version of MacWord on the development team. And then OS2, which is where I worked with Richard Tate, and Windows. And by that time, I'd kind of segued from coding into product design. And so I did a lot of work on sort of futuristic versions of Windows, always kind of looking 2 or 3 versions out. And then there was an opportunity to move over to the consumer division and start a kids software business. That was an interesting experiment for Microsoft. We developed 2 products. One was a painting kind of graphic design product for kids, and the other one was a creative writing product for kids. And we did a lot of things right and we did a lot of things wrong. And it was a really, really great learning experience. But I think we didn't understand how to tackle that business. The channel marketing thing was new to us, just that particular channel. We were still trying to figure out the consumer business as a whole. So arguably jumping into the kids part of the consumer business before we even knew really anything about consumer. Yeah. What happened at the same time is the company was also having to shift its focus and its resources to the web because it was just becoming clear that a lot of this content delivery was going to happen on the web. So that was really hard and really interesting and fulfilling. But then I was feeling kind of antsy and burnt out.
Were you feeling successful there?
I was feeling successful. It's definitely feeling like I was working my ass off, excuse my French. But so that's why at the end of 5 years, I was super burnt out and I asked them for a sabbatical to go to business school at that point. And it was hilarious because it turned out no one had ever asked for a sabbatical before. And
did they pay for your MBA?
Well, I'll tell you, it was no, but we made it. So initially, to excuse the profanity, but the reaction was, WTF, no one's ever asked for a sabbatical. Why do you need to go get a business school degree? Are you not challenged here? Are we not giving you enough product seniority? Are you whatever it is you think you're going to learn at business school, you're going to learn 10 times over here? They were completely confused. And I'm talking all the way to the top of the company, completely confused. And we're like, no way. And I think what happened is they realized I was dead serious and I was just going to walk out the door anyway. And I'd been accepted at that point into a business school that actually turned out to be the one that I decided I really wanted to go to, which was in Europe. It's called INSEAD. It's a great international business school. I think it's one of those moments in life, actually, where if you have complete conviction, the people on the other side of the table can totally sense it, and they know you're not bluffing. And as long as you're not bluffing, you're going to prevail in that situation. I was going to go no matter what. And so I did. And so we ended up striking a deal where I kept all my stock options and I got paid part-time and did some consulting work for them while I was there, and it worked out for everybody. Then I went back to Microsoft and did another, 3-4 years of amazing work for them before I did a total pivot.
And what was the thinking when you did the total pivot? Where was your head at that time?
Microsoft had become a really big company.
And for the listeners, the pivot that we're talking about is to real estate development.
Yeah, so completely out of tech and into real estate development. And
who were the big players in Seattle at that time?
That was 20 years ago, and they were completely different than they are now. There were a lot of family-owned, multi-generational companies that were doing real estate development, but the national players had not arrived. And I don't want to offend anybody, but I remember looking around the city at that time and thinking, the development, the design, it feels very parochial. It feels very, provincial. And I know that's going to sound a little bit judgy, but it didn't feel very urban. I would say that there were a lot of long-term family-owned companies who had done suburban development and were then trying to bring that game to downtown, to the city, and it wasn't working.
Right. Well, I have to say I left Seattle for 20 years. And when I came back, some of these projects that you've created make me feel like the city feels way more alive. So thank you.
Well,
because I was looking for more of a city experience here.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I was feeling the same way. And I had at that point lived, I'd spent a fair chunk of time in Toronto, which is a very urban city with a historic core, and Paris. And in my job, I worked for Microsoft based in Paris for a period of time where I was responsible for all these European markets and traveled to all these great European cities. And so at that point, I'd been totally, brainwashed in a good way about dense, granular urban fabric and what a real city looks like and what real city streets are meant to look like. And Seattle had just had an unfortunate history, like many American cities, of being hollowed out in the 60s and 70s and thinking they needed to tear down all their great old buildings to make room for parking lots because everyone was going to drive. And so it's just this bizarre thing that we thought we needed to hollow out half of our downtowns to make room for the cars. And in doing so, we kind of destroyed the downtowns, the fabric that we thought people were going to drive to. It's a conundrum. Thankfully, most American cities are, on the rebound and have realized that was a mistake and are filling in all those missing teeth. And Seattle was just on the cusp of doing that when I started into real estate in Seattle 20 years ago. So it was great.
And so you started Dunn Hobbes. And so who's Hobbes?
Hobbes was my dog. When you start a company in Washington State or in any, you have to make sure your company name is unique. And there are... It turns out a lot of Dunns, none of whom I'm related to, but there's a lot of Dunns.
I know some Dunns.
Yeah. And so all the obvious names were taken, like Dunn Investments.
So you were 100% woman-owned company.
100% woman and dog-owned companies.
Women and dog-owned and self-funded?
Self-funded initially and self-funded for a long time.
How did you even know how to write projections and do a business model for the business?
So here's my little plug for the University of Washington's real estate program.
I can't wait to hear.
Which is phenomenal. There was this professor who taught real estate in the Department of Urban Planning for decades and decades, and he just passed away, and it was a huge deal. His name is George Rolfe, and this was before UW had a real estate school, which it does now because of him. And but he was teaching this series of courses that I found out about, and I went and took his courses and earned a certificate in urban planning and real estate, like a graduate certificate. At that point, I had an MBA, so I kind of had the finance background. I had the general business background, but I didn't have the real estate finance, and I didn't know how to your exact question, I didn't know how to make a real estate model. So that was all George, and I use a version of his model to this day. So he taught me well. I also feel like I am good at asking for help, and
you also have a really good eye, and you have a good gut.
I like to think I have a good gut. I also, I try not to impose too much on people, but at that time, every real estate developer that I came into contact with, I would ask them questions and ask them for advice and always try to figure out how I could, pay them back in some way. And
was there anyone who kind of took you under their wing besides, obviously, your professor?
There's this guy called Val Thomas who did a lot of really nice apartment and condo buildings around town that you would recognize, and I had dinner with him last night.
Oh.
He's fantastic.
Yeah. So were there any females for you to look up to at that time?
Not really.
Are there today?
There are. Just yesterday, funny you ask, before I went out for dinner with Val, 3 of my real estate developer women friends and I hosted a happy hour just for women developers. So women who literally have an ownership stake in their companies. So we narrowed it down to those women with skin in the game in their own companies, building buildings. And we had over 20.
That's fantastic.
It's not bad.
That's not bad at all. Did you have it at Chop House Row?
No, I worry sometimes that my whole life is so Chop House Row centric that people are going to get tired of me always inviting them to the Cloud Room or to Chop House Row. Although they never do.
For those who have not visited, please visit. It's the coolest. Tell us about the Cloud Room, because I obviously love the Cloud Room, and it's the best. And the bartender makes amazing drinks.
Yeah, the bartender is Jay Keener is amazing.
He's famous.
He's famous, and he's it's been 4 years, and he's kind of the center of our bar program, and he seems to love his little perch up at the Cloud Room. It's a members-based co-working space. It's a little bit different than other co-working spaces that your listeners have probably been to. We made it very comfortable and luxurious, but not in a way that isn't intended to promote like hard work and productivity. And
it does make you want to create though when you're in there. And
I was
also,
going to say a lot of creative
it's
collaboration.
Unbelievable. And Brian Paquette did the interiors, right?
Yeah, Brian and I collaborated. I have to say, I do all my interior design myself, but then I have people like Brian in my life who I can call
to say, am I off track?
Am I off track? Or I need help with this. Like the first set of light fixtures I put in were awful, and I called Brian and I said, come help rescue me. And he found me.
He's got a great eye also.
He is a fantastic designer. So we like to consider ourselves the creative workspace in Seattle. And, you know, we started out with this vision that it would feel like more than a co-working space. It's got this super comfy lounge and bar that people, you know, at the end of a hard day of work can retire to the lounge and have a drink. And it's got a gorgeous outdoor deck.
I love
with
the
a view
outdoor
of
deck.
the city. So it feels very special. It's up on, you know, the upper floor of the Chop House Row building. And so once you're up there, I think what our members love about it is they really are very productive. They feel ensconced in this space that is supporting them to do their work. And
it feels collaborative also.
It's very collaborative. And I think that term gets thrown around a lot, and I think we make it true. So partly because just the nature of the mix of the members, and because we make the extra effort to make sure they know each other, because we see connections that they might not. And the other move we made when we first opened, because we also consider ourselves the local place that even if you're a newcomer, you would want to join because you will get to know, quote, real Seattleites. And what we mean by that is that we are very Capitol Hill based in a certain way. So we gave free memberships to all the Stranger Genius Award winners when we opened, because the Stranger for 10 years gave 6 Genius Awards a year to cultural and artistic leaders. So we've got musicians and filmmakers and writers and journalists and in the mix who came to us through the Stranger. And we collaborate still with the Stranger because they're our neighbors, and Tim Keck is a really good friend.
That's perfect. And so when you started Dunn Hobbes, what was your first big project that kind of put you on the map?
I did this crazy little project at 13th and Union that Dave Miller of Miller Hall designed. It's very distinctive. It's a condominium project. Don't ask me why. I thought a for sale condominium project, high end, was the way to get my feet wet. And Dave hadn't done one either. It was like the blind leading the blind a little bit. Now, I will say I lost money on it, and here's why. We finished the building on September 13th, 2001, so 2 days after 9/11. And so these high-end 8 high-end condos sat for over a year. So my partner and I had to move out of our house. And this is, every developer has their first project horror story. And this is mine. I make my poor partner move out of the house because I can't make my mortgage payments because I've spent all the money I have at this point. All we have left is the house. And we rent the house and we move into the project. And we ended up living there in different units for over 2 years. Now, it's a gorgeous place to live with, but still
an everyday reminder of
And so the story has a happy ending. Contractor gets paid, the bank gets paid, I lose my equity, but we end up selling all the units. I move back into our house, and I live to buy another property with the help of the same bank. As a real estate developer, you work with a lot of lenders over the years, but that's my plug for the local Wells Fargo folks because they got me off the ground, basically. In the late 90s and early 2000s, they were super supportive.
So that was the first project. And when did you take on some of these more visible kind of community projects?
Yeah, the Chop House Row project is actually an accumulation of 6 or 7 properties that I acquired over a period of time and then redeveloped over a period of time. And so unlike doing what most developers would do, which is accumulate all these adjacent properties and then tear them all down and build one massive box, I literally incrementally did it piece by piece and kept the granularity and the distinctive buildings intact. But what I did do was chop the back off a couple of the buildings to make the courtyard in the middle. And so, Shauna, as you know, you come in an alley and there's this central courtyard. And what that did for this collection of 7 old buildings is it meant that they now have a back door, which is a front door onto this courtyard.
yeah.
So it made the space in every one of these buildings more valuable because of this. They now also have this courtyard
Yeah.
interface.
And sometimes there's the little farmer's market out there.
Yeah, we do.
And the cute
farmers
little
market,
the fire
and we
pit.
do art walk
art
stuff. We
walks.
do live music on second Thursdays for
Yeah.
art walk. So it's become a little bit of a cultural destination. We installed an art project last year that we call Ghost Cabin that has the little stage and for live music, and it's the silhouette of an old pioneer building that we know existed, 20 feet down, 100 or more, 150 years ago.
Everyone has to come check it out, because one of the things I love most about Liz, but I'm giving her a little push here, is that she does not self-promote.
No.
Hopefully this is one
Thank
of our...
goodness I'm not in a business that actually requires promotion, because I am quite bad at it.
Well, I think you're just humble, and I think you're just comfortable being just gritty and getting the job done, but not necessarily needing the recognition for it. I want everyone to come see this place, because the first time I came, it was like a mouth drop type of situation. I thought it was the coolest. And now I'm just so lucky to record the podcast here, because I come here all the time.
Well, it's super fun for us to have a podcast recording studio. And that's something that we did at the same time as we did the cloud room, because we had members who were interested in producing content. We also have band practice studios. So we have 10 bands who rent studios from us. And so we're trying to keep the cultural content component in the project. Yeah.
And what about Melrose Market?
Melrose was a project that I'm super proud of. And I stalked the owner of these crazy old auto garage buildings on Melrose between Pike and Pine for years. He was hilarious, and fully acknowledged that I was stalking him. He was okay with that. He'd be like, Liz, I can't sell you the properties till I find that ranch in Montana I've always dreamed of. So we literally at a certain point inked a deal so that I knew I had the option on it. And then it took 3 more years for him to find his ranch before we closed the deal. So it took me all of the early 2000s up until 2008 when we closed to get my hands on those properties. And then I brought in a partner, Scott Shapiro, and we developed them together. It was a super fun process. And then it was actually Scott's idea. We had this one huge 6,000 square foot space. It was either going to have to be some massive corporate restaurant, or we were going to have to divide it up. And Scott had the idea that we could do micro retail in there, and it worked out really, really well. So that was 10 years ago, and there wasn't really other than Pike Place Market, there wasn't a market hall per se. And what's great is I think it's a really great model for any neighborhood. And they're springing up all over the country. And people really appreciate that, farm-grown vegetables and organic meats.
Yeah, it feels good.
Field-cut flowers, yes.
I agree. And so I know that you also do a lot of investing. What types of projects do you look for?
I did more investing before I got really, really busy in real estate, but I did a lot of angel investing in the early 2000s, mostly clean tech. So, everything from solar to desalination to I'm invested in a company in Vancouver called General Fusion that is so close to literally cracking fusion as our primary source of energy. They're super smarty pants scientists. They've been at it for 15 years. There are now some much bigger investors like Jeff Bezos and others who have put money into the company. And so I made my dad invest along with me on that one, which is hilarious.
I wish I had invested along with you.
He's turning 80, and now he's like, oh my God, I'm going to be dead before these guys actually crack fusion. But I keep reminding him, Dad, you helped push it along. We're on the right path here.
Tell him
you
to
never
just
know.
keep healthy, and then he can see it.
Yeah. So I do still do some investing, and I'm more focused these days on women-owned companies. So Danny Cohn from Cohn and Steiner.
Oh, yay.
She's April Pride from Vanderpump.
Yes.
Jody Hall from Good Ship. Those are all investments that I made.
There's always different ways that people kind of give lip service to helping women, but to actually move the needle by investing or by making introductions, it seems like the dream job. Obviously, it's super hard and super difficult, but from the outside, it looks pretty sexy. And so what advice would you give kind of the Oprah question of like your younger self or the mini me that's listening of how to break into real estate development? And second question to that is, what trends are you seeing in real estate?
Okay, I can come to that one in a minute. I think the bootstrap question is an interesting one, and I get it all the time. And, anyone can become a real estate investor. I didn't start with very much money. The myth of the Microsoft millionaire is way overblown. And so I started with a little tiny pile of money that I managed to lose on my first project, per my story about that. But, anyone can bootstrap. It's a question of starting at the scale that you can afford to put a little equity in, and knowing that the property is going to appreciate, and if it produces rent, it's going to service some debt, and then you're going to be able to, refinance it, and then you have a little more money, and you can put it into a second property. So it may take a really long time. So, a lot of times when people ask me how would you bootstrap in real estate, I don't necessarily know that I did it the right way. I would say sort of keep your day job and start investing, and then just change the balance over time between your day job and your investments at the point where it's really requiring you full time, and you've got enough scale that it makes sense to quit
and
your
it's
day
a long
job.
game.
It's a long game. You just exactly. You just said it much more succinctly than I did. It's a really long game, and you should never get in thinking you're going to get out, which is why it's insane that my first project was a condo project. I've never done a for sale product since then. I now buy, renovate, or build and hold potentially forever. People always ask me what my exit strategy is, and I'm like, I don't have one.
I love that. I knew that you were involved in Seattle and kind of on a gajillion boards, but I'm like, holy shit, Liz, you got your finger on the pulse of a lot of different things. And so how do you prioritize your time? And what are you most passionate about right now? And you also didn't answer my other question about real estate trends. Like, isn't there this whole real estate tech?
Yeah, prop tech is huge.
Prop tech. I have a few clients who are like, I need a candidate out of prop tech. I'm like, hold on. Let me Google that.
Suddenly it's a thing.
It's a thing.
Yeah, it may totally change the face of real estate, but probably not at the scale that I do it. I think it's going to change the face of large-scale property management and large-scale asset management. But the stuff that I do is so custom and sort of handcrafted and hands-on that it's interesting, like the kind of property management that I do, which is, okay, we're having art walks, we're booking live bands, we're having an art show, we're organizing an ice cream festival. That's not something that prop tech solves. And so there's this interesting dichotomy between taking all the sort of commodity tasks and technologizing them, if that's a word.
Right.
And then, but at the same time, there's this recognition that property management is getting more hands-on because placemaking is real, and they need to actually program places, not just create them, but program them on
Which
a
is
continual, creative, people-oriented. That's not something that prop tech is going to solve.
You can't outsource that with a computer.
You can't outsource that. Yeah. And so it's super interesting. I think part of the business is going to get more human and more creative, and part of the business is going to get more technology-based.
Well, hopefully you can just use the technology like everyone else to just use the data to tell you more of a story.
Absolutely.
And then put your kind of twist on it to get the human side and keep the creativity alive in all your projects. Yeah.
And it's that creative part that I think, requires a certain kind of individual or a certain kind of team to pull off.
My other question about the boards and how you spend your time.
It's a super relevant question. If you're going to do the kind of real estate I do, which is thinking about community development oriented. I think about the business I'm in. I don't build buildings. I make pieces of city. It's like you're adding to the connective tissue of the neighborhood or the city. And so you have to think contextually. If you're not super plugged into your city, how do you know what you should be making? And so the civic engagement is all part of the job. And I think that's an interesting thing for people interested in this kind of real estate to know. And so I don't think of it as separate or extra or a burden. I think of it as part of my job. Like I'm on the board of the DSA now, and I.
Will you tell our listeners what that is?
Downtown Seattle Association, and so
and what the corridor.
Yeah, and separately, I'm involved in this effort, which the Downtown Seattle Association has also become super involved in. We'd like to lid over several blocks of downtown where when I-5 went through in the 60s, it totally disrupted the connections between our uphill neighborhoods and downtown, and also the street grid and our transportation grid. Like, that decision would never be made today. Everyone in the rearview mirror understands that. And in fact, it was super contentious at the time. And there was very, very powerful opposition to it. But, the feds were determined to come through. And there were certain political elements in Washington state that wanted to see it happen. We've stopped cutting through our cities with highways, but we're now entering this era nationwide of repairing the damage. So there are 30 40 cities around the country that are at some stage of trying to lit over the freeways that are cut through the urban parts of
With
their
like
city.
parks?
Transit stations, real estate.
And the water, what about the waterfront?
Well, the waterfront needs to go first. And so when we talk about lighting the freeway, we're certainly like making extra sure that we're not trying to steal any thunder from the waterfront, which is a more immediate project, and it's happening. And I think it's going to be so fabulous that people can't even imagine. Like, I think what the reality of it is even going to be better than our anticipation of it, if that makes any sense. It's going to be one of those things where we say, oh my God, this is so fantastic. And then lighting over the freeway is going to be the next phase of connecting all those neighborhoods to the waterfront.
I love it. I'm excited. I'm switching gears a little bit because as a recruiter, I always feel like I should link in something around talent. I know that you have a strong eye for talent. You've created a culture within your company. Is there a certain trait that you look for in people that you work well with?
This is going to sound pretty formulaic. That combination of creative fearlessness, if you like, or maybe a different way to put it is willing to think about completely different solutions, new solutions to an old problem, like just that out-of-the-box thinking, combined with...
Like going to Microsoft and asking for a sabbatical? That's outside the box?
That's outside the box. But like, what I want my team to do is to think of brand new ways of doing things. And because that's kind of where the juice comes from in my company. But at the same time, they have to have sort of a rigor around organization. And this goes back in part to the kind of leader I am. And you will appreciate this because you see every kind of leadership model. I joke when I interview to hire that I am a great leader and the worst manager they will ever have. I am the kind of person that runs out in front of the pack with a pitchfork, charging ahead, and I never even look back over my shoulder to see if someone tripped and fell in the ditch.
And you shouldn't have to with the right type of person, right?
But you have to acknowledge your own strengths and weaknesses as a leader to know how to hire. So you're absolutely right. But it took me a while to figure out that some people have this expectation that you're going to mentor and manage them in a way that another leader would, because that would be their skill set, but it's not mine. As we get older, like the one thing I've learned, you play to your strengths. You acknowledge your weaknesses and you play to your strengths.
Yeah, I love that. And I love it when people call them like their ninja skills. Like, what are your ninja skills?
Right, like your superpowers. I think I'm pretty fearless. This is true of real estate developers in general, but I think it's definitely true of me. I'm not afraid to fail, and I'm never afraid to bet the farm. Like, I'm always like, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like, I fail miserably. My parents still have a guest room, and
Do you care what people think of you?
No, I think that's also...
Is that true?
I think it's more true
You're so
of me.
nice that I'm like, is that because you care, or is you're just genuinely that nice?
I really don't care what people think. Now, I wouldn't say that was always true.
I've never heard you say anything like other than nice things about other people.
I think I don't want to be an asshole. I want people to want to do business with me.
Yeah.
But that's different than caring what people think about the decisions that you make.
Yeah.
Like, there were a bunch of developers in town who early on thought I was a cuckoo bird because I was doing things. And that's still true. Like, I will buy a building and do something with it that no one else would do. And I don't care what people think on that level. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Or the way I conduct my business, I'm going to do it my way. I don't really care what the rest of the world thinks. I'm kind of making it up anyway a lot of the time. And so, of course, I care that people think I have integrity or that I'm a nice person to do business with.
Right, but you don't care that they agree with your decisions.
Exactly.
I like that. I love talking to you. My final question, a couple questions. One is, do you feel successful today?
I think I'm finally sitting well with the success that I've had and doing a better job of letting myself feel good about it.
And do you have guilt?
This.
Do you have guilt when you go to Whistler? Or
yeah. So I've talked to my therapist for years about this. You probably can totally relate to this. I think people like us who are really driven to excel at what we do, not because we care about what others think, but once we decide to do something, we want to do it really, really well. We do. We impose guilt on ourselves when we go and take time off and have fun with our friends. I suffered for years from this feeling that I wasn't working hard enough, that I was letting things slip, that it was too chaotic, that I I don't know that if I went away and had fun, I was going to jinx it. Bad things were going to happen while I was gone, almost
Like
to the level of a
superstition.
superstition. And I know I'm not the only entrepreneur that feels that way. Like we inflict these superstitions on ourselves and
Can't distinguish between like what's true and what's a story.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think I'm finally over it. Chop House Row was a really hard project. And even the 2 years after that, we had some bumps in the road, just finishing up the construction and getting the right tenant mix in place. And I think, I don't want to exaggerate, the term PTSD is used for a much more serious situation than just business stress. But I'm only
You're
using
now
that
exhaling
as
a little.
Yes, like that stress that builds up in your nervous system over a period of decades, right? Microsoft starting a real estate company, doing some really hard projects. That exhale took a long time
But you
for
look
me.
amazing. I always tell you this.
Oh,
I'm
you're
always like,
so
what are you doing with your
nice.
skin?
Well, and just in
You
the
don't look
last
stressed
couple
out.
of years, it's you know what I mean? It's going from the top of my head and it's gradually lowering. It's like the tide's going out.
And do you do a lot of self-care, like to relax?
I'm better at it now than I used to be. I'm probably not great at it, but just getting out of town is good for me. I find that travel is very good for my soul.
Oh, yeah. That's the best.
And then
Isn't that why we're doing what we're doing?
Yes.
To like live life.
To live
right?
life.
See the world.
See the world and then come back and be happy to be
Yes.
home.
Yes.
Right? It's
And
finding
so
that balance.
I guess I could maybe answer this, but what fuels you?
I love seeing projects done well. So people will credit me with being really creative. And I'll say, no, you know what? Actually, you're confused. I'm really, really good at seeing stuff around the world that I love and getting inspired by it, bringing it back and integrating it into an idea. So sure, I have a driving idea, but I want to give credit to all those amazing projects I've seen all around the world, or just those amazing cities, those tiny little streets that I've walked down where the urban fabric has just been so perfect. And I think, to put it in a nutshell, I love beautiful, well-crafted cities, and I want to do my small part in making Seattle one of those cities. And so
Well, we're so grateful, and I love having you on the podcast. Thank you so much. And yeah, everybody, go check out Chop House Row. Go check out the Cloud Room, obviously Melrose Market. And thank you, Liz.
thanks, Shauna.
So
It was fun.
Always. Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest news and episodes. You can also contact us at podcast@fueltalent.com to provide feedback, ask questions, and share topics or guests you would like us to cover in the future. We hope you feel inspired by our guests and that we have helped fuel your day. Join us next time for another episode of What Fuels You.